destroying mosques, destroying temples, destroying churches, and forcing people to convert. In my research, I actually have seen that they are asking Christians to give jizya. In terms of if you're Christian, you're offered a chance to give jizya. If you're in their point of view, if you're a Rawafid, you don't get that chance because Rawafid are apostates. You see, so they are giving the option. Otherwise, for example, you see Mosul, there would be no Christians left today, but there are still some Christians.
So their ISIS today is restricting this forced conversion to Shia. It's not the Christians have a choice.
Christians have a choice, but the jizya amounts to so much that it's not plausible to pay. So at the end of the day, they would also either have to flee or be killed.
So would it be fair to say that that's not reflected in the earlier?
That's not reflected in the earlier, because even, for example, the conquest of Jerusalem, the sacred sites of the Christians and obviously the Christians destroyed the sacred sites of the Jews, but the sacred sites of the Christians were not destroyed, they were kept intact.
Yeah, I think some Jews saw them as liberators, or at least when they conquered, Muslims came into Europe, I think a lot of Jews saw them as that.
Yes, what I've read, Jews have seen even not just Jews, but even Coptics. When the Muslims conquered Egypt, they saw the Muslims as liberators. But I'm not sure if those are from Muslim sources or if they're neutral sources or not. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I'm just going to go off on what Brother Ahmed and Brother Steve said. I'm sorry, you don't want to delve into this stuff, but he got me kind of curious. Now, basically, he said the extremism was kind of born after the caliphate. He didn't reference before, so I'm not going to make him, but do you think that transitioned into the Hanbali, or is that something else completely? That's my first question.
You're saying what occurred in the early generations, if it had anything to do with
the Hanbali that you were talking about.
Hanbali school of thought.
Yeah.
I mean, every school in Islam wants to follow the original version of Islam because that's the pure version. It's just your methodology of getting there.
Okay.
So the Hanbalis chose a fundamental method to get there. That was their route. The Malikis and Hanafis, Shafis chose a different route, But that doesn't mean that both of them were looking. Those other schools were looking for something else. They're looking for the same thing.
All right. So, and my other question would be kind of going off what Steve said. The earlier Muslim, earlier Muslim empire, I don't call it empire, kingdoms, like after the Sahaba, like way after the Sahaba.
After the four.
Yeah, like 1,000 years ago, like let's just say estimate.
Okay.
So obviously this Hanbali thought was existing, this extreme Hanbali that was existing under them. How did they deal? Do you know how they dealt with it? Do you know how they like contained it, or no? You don't know how they contained it.
Right. So like I mentioned, the Abbasis, which is one of the kingdoms that you're talking about, they tried to declare the Hanbalis as outside of Islam. By banning their meetings, banning the teaching of their school, but obviously it didn't work.
And after the Abbasids, is what I'm mainly referring to, like let's say under Salah ad-Din, after him, how did they contain it? Did they contain it even?
Well, I mean, sometimes, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah, sometimes his views that were contrary to the ruling power caused them to be imprisoned. But sometimes in time of war, you actually need these type of views. So when the Crusades were going on, or fighting other sects in Islam, such as the Alawis in the Levant, Ibn Taymiyyah's views were very much required by the ruling power.
So it was like kind of like I use it when I need it, when it's against my interest.
Exactly.
Just like politics, kind of.
It is politics.
Okay, I got you. Any other questions? I kind of answered the question.
Well, I kind of wanted to speak to what you were saying. Thank you. It's just like the way I would get the separation between politics and religion. For instance, the whole thing about after the Prophet died, and then the son see that more as like, if the United States is South, you know how they're always trying to secede from the Union, or Texas is always trying to secede. After the Prophet died, they didn't think that Islam applied to them anymore. Like they had agreed to be Muslim, but they didn't understand. Like they saw it more as a political alliance. So when the Prophet died, they were like, okay, I guess we can just go back to doing our thing now. We don't pay any taxes or anything like that. So I would see more as like a political thing, like the same thing if Texas tried to secede from the Union, you know, Obama would be like, we'll go to war to try to keep you in the United States. Not so much as like, we're going to try to convert, like forced conversions and all that. I don't think that forcing people to convert was the big thing. I think a lot of it was getting people to come back into the fold after they'd already agreed to stay there forever. And yeah, that's what I think it was.
So, yeah, that was just a comment or it was a question as well?
I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I think that.
I mean, as a researcher, I don't believe that there was ever a time of utopia. So even, for example, during the Ridda Wars that you're talking about, there were things that were not Islamically correct. For example, the execution of Malik ibn Uwaira. You guys know Malik ibn Uwaira's story? So he was the tax collector of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in a certain tribe. And after the Prophet died, he, like some other companions, didn't accept the caliphal authority of the first caliph. Does that make him outside the fold of Islam? That is the question. So basically, you know, he went to go dialogue with Khalid bin Walid, and end result was he was executed and his head was put in a pot and boiled for others to see as a form of didactic punishment. You know, is that Islamically allowed? In terms of what I've read, I don't think that would be allowed. So there was no time of utopia except, as a Muslim practitioner, there was no time of utopia except during the Prophet's rule himself. That was the last question, Brother.
I believe so. Thanks again for your presentation.
Mansoor Rizvi's guest. Yeah, just introducing Mansoor Rizvi, social work master's student. Topic is women in Islam.
Wife beating us.
Wife beating in Islam.
Thanks again, Shabir, for that brilliant presentation. Our next presenter is Mansoor. He's in
Graduate School of Social Work.
Graduate School of Social Work, and he's about to present to you guys about wife beating in Islam.
The coffee, the guy might come and take the coffee, so whoever wants some coffee, hot chocolate, take it out. Yeah.
And there's milk and cream
You guys enjoy those?
and tea. And tea as well.
Yeah, so you guys can just.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Everybody, brothers in Islam and humanity, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise belongs to Him. The one who creates, but is not created, the one who sees, but is unseen, and the one who gave us, as Muslims, the best example for us to follow, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, a brief background on what I'm about to present. I am a graduate of an Islamic seminary from the Jafri Shia School of Thought, and I had written a paper on this issue of wife beating, because in the media it's kind of prevalent to give this impression that Islam condones wife beating, and some Orientalists, other individuals who are looking to attack Islam will often cite this particular verse in Surah Nisa, the chapter of the women. So my intent is to kind of, as best as I can, discuss this in an academic manner, but keeping in mind that there's a primarily Muslim audience here, and then at the end, if time permits, have a slight question and answer session. So this particular verse of the Quran, I'm just going to briefly read the translation. It's the 34th verse in the Quran. And the brief translation is, "And as to those women in whose part you fear desertion, admonish them, and avoid them in beds, and leave them. Then if they obey you, do not seek away against them. Verily Allah is ever high, ever great." The controversy of this verse is centered around a particular verb in this particular verse of the Quran. And the root verb is daraba, which means to strike, which is one of the meanings, I should say, to strike. And that's where the controversy lies. So it's because of this verse that often Islam is mischaracterized as a religion which condones wife beating, by actually going to the text and saying, see, it's in your own verse, it's in your own holy book that says men have free leeway to go ahead and beat up their women. And that's why it's important, strictly from an academic perspective, to understand the contextual basis for this verse, and to see what scholars from who actually have studied this particular verse from all the traditions of Islam, what their takes are, and so forth. And you won't really find, at least I can say this from both the Shia and Sunni perspective, although my perspective and the analysis I made was from the Shia perspective, I would dare to say that this is true in both schools of thought. You won't really find any mainstream person saying that this is license for somebody to go and beat up their spouse. So the two scholars who I cited in this paper, one was a very prominent scholar in the Shia world by the name of Allama Shah, who has a famous commentary of Tafsir al-Quran called Al-Mizan. It has a very philosophical bent to it. If any of you get a chance, I'll encourage you to check it out just for looking at it from a different perspective. He's actually, in the academic world, he's you could say a teacher of a couple of very famous academics, since there are several academics here who are present, Sayyid Hussein Nasser being one of them, William Chittick being another, Sachiko Morata. These three actually studied under Allama. And I'm sure several of you are familiar with these three individuals who are very prominent in academia and in the Islamic world. He was a teacher, of course. How can I forget Henry Corbett? Well, Henry Corbett's passed away, but these are some individuals who have benefited from this particular scholar. So, a lot of times when you take the text into context, when you take a look at a text without any context, it's very easy to mischaracterize the verse. And sometimes people who are, and this holds true for any particular tradition. So, you can't simply say that this is for Islam. You know, me, for example, if I go into scripture from another religion or school of thought, it's very easy for me to pull out and say, haha, this is what this text is saying, and it's doing a disservice if the context is not fully understood. So that, I just kind of want to get that out there. Now, what's interesting is this particular verb, daraba, has several meanings in Arabic language. Now, those of you are, many of you are academics. I'm sure you're familiar with Mr. Hans Word, the Arabic English Dictionary. Turn to the page where the interpretation of the verb daraba is. Look how many meanings it has. It will blow your mind away. I mean, we all hear about those meanings. Daraba means, commonly in colloquial and Amniya, the colloquial Arabic, most people, when they think of daraba, it's usually used in the context of hitting. But if you look at it from an academic perspective, there are several meanings to this particular verse, but it's just interesting that people choose to highlight one particular meaning. And this verb itself, in different places in the Quran, is used in different places contextually. I'm not going to get into that so much, but just some food for thought. So why this verse? What's the background of this particular verse? So Islamic scholars will say that it deals with problems that arise between a husband and wife, and it's in that particular context. So when, let's say, for example, there is a fear from the wife being, say, abusive, or like maybe being promiscuous, things like that, that's causing harm to the husband, then the idea is to kind of gradually deal with it. So an Islamic scholar will say, well, things were done. The idea was, and again, keep in mind that back then it was a very misogynistic society, and things were done gradually. Some of you, I'm sure, had a chance to listen to Amar Nakshwani's lecture a few days ago. He was making a point that things were in gradual, so we have to kind of, the term he uses, your 7th century thinking caps on, and I would say that this is definitely pertinent to this particular verse. So back then, there was a whole atmosphere of beatings and so forth, and so the idea is, so for example, let's say a man and wife are having problems, a woman is being abusive herself, or being promiscuous. The first step is to have a talk with this person. And again, we're dissecting this particular verse from the perspective of Islamic scholarship. So to have a sit down with her, say, what's going on? Could we put an end to this bickering? And basically a gentle counsel. Okay, that's like, you could say, step one. And then after that, if that doesn't work, then to basically stop sleeping with them. And the Quran, actually mentions this explicitly. To just, have separate beds and not have any sexual relations with your spouse. And then, if that doesn't work, then this term, this is when daraba comes into play. And this is where, interestingly enough, from this paper that I did, I presented two different perspectives from the Shia paradigm. None of them which suggest any kind of beating and violence of any sort, but it kind of leads us to get a different and better understanding of what might be presented out there in the mainstream, or as Stephen Colbert would say, lamestream medium. So Allah about the Bible, when he talks about this particular verse in the Quran, he brings up a tradition of the Prophet, which is narrated by the 5th Shia Imam Mahmoud al-Baqir, and this tradition is also in Sunni narrations as well, where the tradition states, when talking about this particular verse, that the force that you can quote unquote use when talking, and this is a physical interpretation of the verse. The quote unquote force you can use is a force that's equivalent to a miswak, which is like a toothbrush. So basically, if we were to play devil's advocate and say, okay, well let's yes, this is saying beat, and let's connect the dots and look at this hadith. So you're supposed to beat your wife with a toothbrush. If we all play devil's advocate in that light, and we all know this is a very ludicrous notion of you can't hurt somebody with a toothbrush, let alone beat them. So contextually, a lot of certain scholars, and quoting Alamat al-Batabai, and you'll find this in Shia scholarship, and Nakshwani also alluded to this in his talk, is that the idea is more kind of like like, you know what, there's a problem. It's not in a disciplinary level, more like bringing to attention of a problem. So for, I guess an analogy that some scholars would say is, let's say there's a dispute between friends, and the friends are like, you know, a friend puts his hand on his friend's hand saying, you know, we've got a problem and this needs to be resolved. So this is not in a disciplinary context, but more like calling to attention that you have a particular problem. And these are the steps preceding what would hopefully be avoided divorce. So all these steps, Islamic scholars would argue, is steps that are taken to avoid a divorce. And again, neither of the two interpretations that I will present, the first of which I have already done, indicate any sort of like violence or beating, or more. And the first interpretation being more so like as a warning that, hey, we're about to get divorced. So not in any kind of you're bad, boom, that's it, you're going off the account. So that's one. A second interpretation, and a lot of this information you'll find on the website, al-islam.org. So from a Shia academic perspective, you'll find a lot of articles, you'll find different sources of information on that website. It's very good for those of you who are in academia and are looking for good sources of information from Shia scholars themselves and what they've written. I would definitely encourage you to check out that site because it has a lot of information straight from the horse's mouth, you could say, in terms of what some scholars have said. And then, of course, you will find differences among, as in any group, you'll find differences among scholarship in terms of like, this is what one position took. So obviously that is the nature of scholarship. So the other perspective is from another scholar by the name of Sayyid Lari, who was very prominent in Shia scholarship, has many books. Those of you from the Shia community are probably familiar with some of his books. So his interpretation is a non-physical one. What he says is that this particular verse is saying, okay, if there's a problem, that's it. You just leave. So this is his particular interpretation of this verse. In fact, he argues that the tradition that many others have taken, like and other, both in Shia and Sunni circles, this hadith about the miswak, he says this is not even authentic. So you have this difference of opinion within Shia scholarship itself, but neither of them are taking the position that yes, this is advocating any kind of violence against the women. And again, we can't. It's important to know that you have to take into account the political climate that exists, because in many different scriptures, you'll find verses that, if you look at it, you'll be like, "Whoa, wow, it looks like crazy stuff." And I'll just quote from you a verse in Deuteronomy in the Bible. And again, this is not to say or advocate that Christianity or Judaism is advocating kind of violence, but just that there seems to be a double standard when it comes to labeling a particular religion as misogynist based on taking one verse out of context, but it's not done in other, at least by the mainstream media, it's not done with other verses. So this is from Deuteronomy 25-11-12. When men fight with one another, and the wife of the one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of him who is beating him, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the private parts, then you shall cut off her hand, your eye shall have no pity. Heavy stuff. So my point in mentioning this is that it's very dangerous to take any verse, regardless of the religion, without understanding the context, regardless, understanding authenticity, and that's where research and academia come into play. Thank you very much. At this time, if anyone has questions about Shabir.
I have a question in regards to the verb that was used. 'Cause it's not the only place in the Quran where that verb is used in terms of the striking, the question of striking one's wife. In, I believe, chapter 38, verse 44, Nabi Ayub is told by God to strike his wife using the same word. So in that case, there's no question that he did strike. You know? So why is there such a difference, marked difference between both?
That,
38 in verse 44.
does everyone know the background of what he's referring to? Do you want to share? Would you like to share the background?
Go ahead.
No.
I guess the wife disobeyed the prophet of God, and he made an oath that he would punish her.
Okay. So the verse that he's talking about, the Nabi Ayub or Job in English, there he's talking about a verse where he took a vow that he would punish his wife because she did A, B, C, and D. Now, why? Now, to be honest with you, that the interpretation of that verse I haven't studied in detail, so I don't want to give any incorrect interpretations commentary because I haven't looked at it in detail, which definitely would be an interesting thing to do. That definitely very relevant. I do know that this quote unquote beating, even from what I've read, I think I'm trying to remember where I read this. It might be actually in the Tafsir Mir Ahmad Ali. He was a Shia commentator. I think even he may have commented this. And again, I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong. That it's not beating in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to strike her, but there's a similar connotation because he had this vow to fulfill. But that definitely requires further research.
Just one more question. I know it might sound funny, but in many of the third world countries, and specifically the Islamic countries, for example, if you're a student and you disobey in class, they beat you with a ruler. I don't know how different in size is a ruler with a miswak, but they're both not too big, but a ruler does hurt quite a bit when it's struck in your hand.
Yeah, see, then here we're talking about culture versus religion. This might be the cultural practice of these places, but I can't really argue that these things are condoned Islamically. And actually, one thing I forgot to mention, there's a hadith that's considered authentic. I know this in the Shia traditions. I believe this may be in the Sunni traditions as well. And I'll just quote this verbatim, at least the translation verbatim. I am amazed, this is from the Prophet Muhammad. I am amazed at the one who strikes his wife, while he is more deserving to be struck himself. Do not strike your wives with canes, because there is a legislative retaliation, qisas, for that. In other words, you have to pay up if you do something. Rather, chastise them with a curtailment in their maintenance. Thus you shall gain felicity in this world and the next. This is found, there's Shabir's probably familiar with this. The two sources where you can find this particular tradition. You find this in Bihar al-Anwar, and you find this in Mustadrak al-Wasa. If you need the exact reference, I can get it for you. I have it here. I know culturally in Eastern countries, there's this concept that, let's beat them, but is it compatible with Islam? That's certainly up for debate.
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
It's nice to see you in person. I was thinking about, I've been reading Fatima Mernis's The Veil in the Male Elite, and this feminist scholar, she has every reason to disprove that Islam is against women in any sort of fundamental way. But she does look at a lot of the exegesis or a lot of the commentary from other people like Tabari and Ibn Sa'd, and when she talks about like the not exegesis, what is the word? I give you basically like the context of the verses.
The context.
Like, yeah.
Commentary?
Yeah.
Shep, right?
Yeah. And Assalamu alaikum. I knew this man from Facebook before I met him in real life, so. And she was talking about how somebody had come, a woman had come to Muhammad, peace be upon him, and said that my husband had hit me, and I wanted to be able to have retaliation, and he was about to do the retaliation, but then Jabril came with this verse, and the word for like, if any of your wives show, it's translated in what I'm reading right now as arrogance, but she looks at the commentary, the early commentary, and says that it was actually a word that meant rebellion, with a connotation of like a sexual rebellion, and that it had something to do with like, I don't know what exactly that means, but maybe like women didn't want to do certain practices in bed. This was, it was indeed about like actually striking, or it did condone it, but the commentators wrote extensive commentary like limiting this to certain conditions that had to be met, like just to make sure that this was extremely carefully not condoning violence outright, because like this is a religion where you say if you strike another Muslim, it's like makes you commit a grave sin. I think the application of it is a lot more limited, but I do think it's about striking from everything I heard. I remember one commentary was that Muhammad said, I wanted one thing, God wanted another. Another commentary is, you can hate your wives, but only the worst of you will have recourse to this method. Those were like certain like commentaries that I think really show that if you really want to follow the Sunnah, even though the Quran says one thing, that Muhammad did not hit his women. So, but I do think it's, I don't think that we can get around, if we're looking at the commentary as like, as authentically pure sources, at least, because I'm not saying that they're perfect either, so, okay.
Well, interesting thing about Mirnusi is you'll find, and Shabir might know a little bit about this. There are scholars. She brings up some interesting points, but a lot of her information is also incorrect. And speaking strictly from an Islamic academic perspective, and I know one person who critiques some of her works, and Shabir might correct me if I'm wrong, might know from more sources. There's a Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi in Toronto. I know he has critiqued some of her things. There's other scholars who have critiqued some of
I'm
her.
not sure the person to critique here would be her with so much of her sources, because she goes to the first commentators of the Quran who supposedly knew.
Yeah, I'm saying in general, talking about Fatma Mirnisi is a person that she, what I'm saying is with anybody, whatever's written, obviously you want to take it with a grain of salt, like, considering, whatever she's learned, whatever she's saying. I know she has, from an academic perspective, she's gotten certain things inaccurate, and I can share that
On this
information.
question, was she critiqued?
I'm sorry?
On this issue, was she specific?
If she was, I haven't read it, so I can't comment on that. But I know in general that there are Islamic scholars who have critiqued some of her things, pointing out that certain inaccuracies and some of the things that she.
Is wrong, is right twice a day. Just because you can't use an ad hominem attack against her just because she gets some other things wrong. I'm talking about this particular verse. She talks about the commentators themselves, like on the Quran. Like, I don't think she even wanted it to be true. So I don't think that she's just making some hidden agenda or something like that.
Well, that can certainly be argued, and I wouldn't categorize it as ad hominem, because the points I'm making is that you want to look. I'm speaking strictly from an academic perspective. You have to, because I can certainly make a claim, but it may not have any academic credibility. I could say, sky's green, and be like, what? Yeah, I made that claim, and then then later on say, well, that this person is saying something else. They said that, don't bring up the fact they said that the sky is green. That's ad hominem. I think that. I think that's kind of the analogy. I'm not saying throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm sure there's certain things that can be benefited from whatever she has to say. But what I'm saying is take it with a grain of salt and know that there are, Islamic academics who have critiqued her and pointed out a lot of mistakes in what she's made.
Right, skepticism is important. I agree with that.
Who was next?
I had a question as well as a indirect comment on the gentleman's
terms of this verse, you mean?
Yes, sir.
In terms of the verse, from the research that I've done, and I'm speaking from the Shia lens, and I think that this is probably, and I'm sure a similar thing happens in the Sunni scholarship circles. The idea, like it's a several step process, and one of the steps is, if after a verbal, dialogue doesn't work, then to avoid sexual relations with the wife. And I believe it's explicit. I don't have the verse in front of me, but it explicitly saying, sleep in separate beds.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think Mansoor, you had a question?
Yeah. In regard to the verse about like hitting or beating or dribuhunna, do you know like for what reason or when or what historical event happened that verse was revealed for or to, like?
Off the top of my head, no. I know that it was in terms of like the logistics of, okay, this has to be done and this has to be done. That's what I've researched. But the actual boom at this time, that, like for example, if it was revealed for this person doing this, etc. That off the top of my head, no, do not.
And also have a comment that like for example, like the hitting or like tapping or like with the small object, that was like ordered as like a last resort, right? So for example, like we know that historically, like in the hadith or in historical way, that Rasulullah ﷺ never hit or done anything when his wives or any of his wives like either were upset with him or any reason, right? So there's one thing of that being an option and that like being acted upon, right? So like someone can say that he never acted upon it, therefore nowadays we men or guys or males don't know how to keep their control, so they don't know the limits or the appropriate action. So just beating them is not. What?
Everybody wants coffee, take it.
Oh yeah, if you have coffee, you can drink it and
Take it now, otherwise the guys come take it.
yeah.
Just say the hot cocoa.
Yeah.
Does anyone want any cookies before I take them? Sorry. All right.
Just a couple.
So the difference between acting, like so the scholar, I would assume, for example, in the Hanbali school, and the Hanafi school, they had a debate where, for example, Hanbali used the hadith, right, of when Rasulullah he said, if anybody that's staying at home don't come and pray in the masjid, to burn their houses. They use that in order to say that everybody has to go, like the men have to go and pray in the masjid. While the Hanafi said that that's not the case. Obviously, when the masjid is nearby, that's not the case because he said it, but he never acted upon it. And so they have, like for example, the Hanbali have the methodology, Ashabir said about hadith being valued more in their methodology, so that could be also one argument saying that, well, he never acted upon it, so it's not even
But the thing
valid,
is,
especially in social context.
well, one thing to keep in mind is I mentioned was that this was all done. The context behind this was the effort to stop a divorce, which was, although allowed, that's the quote unquote the last resort, not the. So it's in other words, this is not being seen as like this is the last resort. The last resort is, that's it. These are all being done to avoid a divorce. At least from the ones who take the interpretation of it being physical in nature. That this is kind of we want to make sure that a divorce doesn't happen because we know from a theological perspective Islam it's allowed, but it's something that's strongly discouraged. Any other questions, thoughts? Chris? Yes, please.
The verb daraba, like in the Quran is primarily probably you could make the argument in a metaphysical sense. So like usually, like you said, like colloquially, narratively, we use the word daraba as in like physically hitting something. But in the Quran, you often find the verb used actually with Allah as being the agent. So daraba Allah. So that's always used to kind of the meaning being Allah strikes. So it's always kind of, I think, primarily used in a metaphysical sense as opposed to a physical sense.
Thank you for bringing that was my point, that some people have interpreted, darab in other places in the Quran. Like he brought up a place where darab was used. He brought up a place, there's other places where darab was used in some places in the Quran, and some have been interpreted in those cases it means leaving. In all those cases, actually in the one that you're referring to, there's another one where it's being used in the context of leaving. Like a totally different context, not having anything to do with physical. It's only like the one that he mentioned that has a potential physical connotation, and the one that I mentioned, which some would argue have a possible physical connotation.
There's another phrase, also literally striking the ground. So it sounds like it's a physical sense, but really what it's used to be that universal, finding means of life.
And that's why, it's kind of like the talk Shabir was given, that the importance of taking things into context, because, if you look at the problems that exist in society, when you do a copy and paste job, without any context, that's when you run into problems of, especially if you add a black and white thinking, black and white paradigm to things, that exacerbates the situation. So it's like a formula for disaster. One, black and white thinking, number one. And if you throw in like a copy and paste job, you're asking for trouble. Anybody else like to ask? Okay, it's a wrap. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Mansoor. And with that, I believe I'm going to close the event right now. And before that, thanks to everyone to make this a nice gathering for all of us to come out here, have some coffee, and have a nice, meaningful, constructive discussion as well. So thanks again, everyone, and hopefully we'll have another event like this next semester. Thanks so much. Your cat is up here. My what? Your cat is Wait, Carol, you said?
Cat.
Oh, yeah.
Cat. What do you? I remember you telling me thinking of. Don't lose it. State House. Oh, okay.
I'm just looking at how do you
Pause the recording.
how do you pause it?
See if it was good. Is it that small? No, it's this one right here.